Good morning, friends. Good morning. Good Wednesday morning. Hump day. Halfway through the week. At least for most people, I guess. Depends on what kind of a work schedule you have. Middle of the week might be a different day for different folks. It's not really the middle of the week for me. I think to me, the middle of the week would actually be like yesterday, Tuesday. Anyway, but that's because I'm Pastor Brian. I'm the pastor here at Christ United Methodist Church in Waynesboro. Great to be here. Great to be able to offer this ministry to you folks, and great to have you joining me. It is good to be together. It is good to be together. So welcome one and all. Some have been joining right from the very beginning, December 1st of 2020. And others are maybe just joining us for the first or second time. Welcome to you. Welcome to all. I'm humbled that you find it worthwhile. A worthwhile expenditure of your time. Worthwhile expenditure of your time. We're going to try to keep that going. Hopefully you're enjoying what we're doing. We are on, this is PB Reads the Bible, and this is episode 3 on our journey through the book of John, the Gospel of John, the 4th book of the New Testament. So as you come in, feel free to join the conversation. Say hello or good morning and all that kind of stuff. Let us know. Excuse me. Let us know you're there. Let us know you're there. Facebook only gives me a number, and I like to put names and stuff like that to it so I can keep you in prayer. Oh, I see. Good morning, Maureen. It is a beautiful day where you are. Not so much here. It's chilly out and damp, and we're expecting rain. And it is quite overcast. It's giving that look. Now, I know some of you aren't able to join, on time, so to speak, at the time, which is 9 o'clock every morning. And so you're watching some other time. That's great. We love that. You can go ahead and say hello or good morning anyway. Let us know. You can also leave comments or questions. That goes for both people watching online, watching live, or watching the recording. Go ahead and leave a question, and I'll try to answer them as best I can, or leave comments about it. And so I try to keep up on that as we're doing the video, but sometimes I don't see the comment or question until after we're done. I promise I'll get back to you with it. And if you're leaving it because you're watching some other time, I'll try to answer it tomorrow or the next day whenever I actually see the question or comment, which I look a couple times during the day, and then I check again even the next day. I apologize, I forgot to check. I didn't check yesterday's this morning, so there might have been something there that I missed. I'll have to go back in and check that out. Good morning, John. Good to have you with us as well. All right. So when last we talked, when we were together yesterday, we finished up chapter 1. We finished chapter 1 with that lovely little story of lovely stories of Jesus and his first disciples coming to him and being part of it, and especially the story with Nathanael and Jesus demonstrating knowledge beyond human capacity, saying, "Yeah, I saw you before Philip called you." Congratulating Nathanael on his belief, even though it was just because if that made you believe, just wait until you see what I've got up my sleeve, so to speak. Well, you're going to see more amazing things than that. You're going to see angels ascending and descending on the Son of Man, not on some ladder or staircase. It's going to be on the Son of Man. That's what Jesus says. Oh, we got several popping in at one time. Hello, Cheryl. Good morning, Marcia. Good morning, Colleen. Okay. So keeping that in mind, like that was the very last statement, because that to the author of this story, this fourth evangelist, that's an important thing, and it actually leads us right into this next one, because we see right off the bat, on the third day there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, Okay, so it's the third day. The author wants us to know that what's happening, there wasn't a time lag. Good morning, Marilyn. There wasn't a time lag. The last thing he said was, was Jesus saying, you're going to see more amazing signs than this. Remember, this is the book of signs. The first 12 chapters of John is called the book of signs, which is John's word for miracles, what we would typically call a miracle, because it's something that points to something greater. For John, it's not what's happening, or at least not just what's happening. It's not the event, the action, but it is what it points to is the important part. It's a sign. A sign is something that points to something else. A sign is something that points to something else, doesn't point to itself. And so that's important for John. And John wants us to know that Jesus is getting right into it. It's only 3 days later, and we're going to start seeing these things, these greater things that Jesus was talking about. So on the third day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. Pause. It's important to note that John doesn't give a lot of details a lot of times. So when he does, we need to pay attention. When he doesn't, it's serving a purpose as well. The fact that he doesn't give us a lot of details about this wedding tells us that that's not the important part of the story. So don't get bogged down in it. If it was important to know, like, why Mary was at this wedding, why Jesus was at this wedding, how could his disciples be invited if it's only been 3 days? Don't get bogged down in those kind of questions or details. Quite frankly, they're not important. Quite frankly, they're just not important for the author, and therefore they shouldn't really be important for us. We can conjecture, we can guess, and maybe that's fun, but not necessary. Good morning, hon. Okay, so they're at Cana of Galilee. Now, where is Cana of Galilee? Cana is approximately 8 miles. I'm going to say it's about 8 miles, almost due north of Nazareth. So if Jesus was in Nazareth before this, then that's where he went. But he might have also been in Capernaum, because that's where he spent a lot of time, which is about 16 miles, maybe 18 miles from Cana. Not quite exactly east-west. Capernaum would be probably east-northeast of Cana, and just up a little bit, and right on the sea. So I don't think it's really said. He was in the Jordan area before that, so we're not sure. But anyway, he went to Cana. They went from Nazareth to Cana, most likely from Nazareth to Cana. So it's about 8 miles due north is where this wedding is taking place. Before we read more of the story, I want to talk about the context, the social context of a wedding, of what's taking place. Because, of course, we're going to have our own ideas of a wedding based on weddings that we've attended in the 20th and 21st century. But a wedding in the first century Judea is different. There are still some cultures that have a week-long celebration for a wedding, but most don't. Most, it's just a few hours on one day. We celebrate with the bride and groom, send them on their way, and everyone goes home. But in the first century, a wedding feast, it was a feast, and it was a celebration, and not just for a few hours, but for usually up to a week, usually like a week-long thing. Why? Well, no TV, no radio, no internet. A wedding is kind of like the social event of the year. Okay, so being invited to a wedding is important, and having this, celebrating and inviting people to a wedding was important. So you had many people there, some of whom you barely knew, but it was It was the right thing to do. The better your wedding feast, the better your celebration, the more honored you were in your community. And honor is of tremendous importance to folks in first century. In the first century, the miracle of compound interest really hadn't been discovered. So the idea of gaining more and more and more money wasn't quite as important as it is today. I'm sure it still was among the rich and powerful, don't get me wrong, but among common people, they saw that they usually saw and thought that this is the best we're going to have it. We're not going to get any more, so let's gather something else instead. And so they gathered honor. So honor is very important in first century society, period. And a wedding feast, a really good one, is a way to gain honor and raise honor. Okay. So Jesus and his disciples have also been invited to the wedding. When the wine gave out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what concern is that to you and to me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Now standing there were 6 stone water jars for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. Jesus said to them, "Fill the jars with water." And they filled them up to the brim. He said to them, "Now draw some out and take it to the chief steward." So they took it. When the steward tasted the water that had become wine and did not know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew, the steward called the bridegroom and said to him, "Everyone serves the good wine first, and then the inferior wine after the guests have become drunk. But you have kept the good wine until now." Jesus did this, the first of his signs, in Cana of Galilee, and revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. After this, he went down to Capernaum with his mother, his brothers, and his disciples, and they remained there a few days. Pause. I'm going to pause. Okay, so big wedding celebration. Wedding celebration is huge, and it's you establish honor, you gain honor. So the idea of running out of provisions at a wedding feast is unthinkable. This family, and this we're going to look at this first as like the physical part, because remember, so much of John can be read both physical and spiritual or theological. So we're going to talk about the physical aspect of this first. And why is Mary so concerned? Notice John never calls her Mary. He never uses her name. She is always woman, or Jesus calls her woman. She's always the mother of Jesus. Always the mother of Jesus. She's only called by name in the synoptics. Why? I don't know. Just wanted to mention that though too. But why is she concerned? Why is she concerned? I would say that she is concerned because she is compassionate, and she feels for the family. Because if they run out of food, run out of wine, that's a serious black mark. You're not gaining honor, you're losing honor. They're going to be talked about probably for quite some time. So she knows that Jesus can do something about it. At least we assume or presume that she believes or knows that Jesus can do something about it. And she tells him this. But his answer, notice his answer. Now, to our 21st century ears, it sounds harsh. It's really not. It's really not. "Woman, what concern is that to you and to me?" Woman isn't necessarily, it's not as harsh as it sounds. He's not being disrespectful. it would have been a common practice, we believe anyway, to have used something like that. Now, yeah, it's his mother, so maybe it's a little bit of distancing himself from her, but it's not. We shouldn't read that as woman kind of thing, some sort of a derogatory statement, or oh, you're overreacting. It's nothing like that. He's actually speaking just nice and politely to her. The other half of it, what concern is that to you and to me? Also, might sound harsh, but would have been basically a common statement. Again, distancing, a little bit of distancing from what is taking place. My hour has not yet come. Here's where we're going to change from talking about physical to spiritual. Maybe I should finish the physical first, because Jesus does solve everything. He makes it so the family doesn't lose face, so that they gain honor by changing the water to wine, and so the party can. The comic D.L. Hughley says this proves that Jesus was a black man, because only a brother would go, let's keep the party going. But that is basically what Jesus did. He kept the party going, for the family, but also for a sign, a sign to point something greater. We start to see that with that next line, that last part of that. My hour has not yet come. My hour has not yet come. What does that mean? Jesus is speaking about and John is having Jesus speak about his glorification, the hour of his glory. For John, Jesus's glory is revealed, not in the transfiguration, because John doesn't have the transfiguration. We see Jesus's glory through his miracles, through his signs. We see that, but his true glorification doesn't take place until his crucifixion and resurrection. And so he's saying, my time is not yet, my hour is not yet come. It's not time for my glorification. It's not time for my glorification. It's also saying, my time, how I do things, is based not on no one has a claim over me. Jesus is actually stating his independence from any kind of outside pressures. The only clock that Jesus observes is the clock of God, the clock of the Father, and his own clock. I will only do things based on when God the Father wants me to do things, and when it is my time. So don't try to push me into doing something when it's not yet my time. Mary, or his mother, doesn't argue. Presumably, we would say that's the author's way of saying that she accepted his argument and accepted his independence. However, she still figured that he was going to do something, but she wasn't going to try to force him. But she does tell the servants, do whatever he tells you to do. So there are 6 stone water jars there, each containing 20 to 30 gallons, or capacity for 20 to 30. Notice they're empty. Now, here's where the author does throw in details. He takes a lot of time, a lot of space, just to talk about these jars and the getting ready for the miracle. The miracle itself is spoken of very quickly, but it's the preparation for it that the author takes a lot of time with. And that's for a purpose. They're not just regular jars. First of all, they're stone jars, not earthen jars. So they are ceremonially pure, the Levitically pure, because they're made out of stone, not out of earth. Since they're made out of stone, not out of earth, they cannot be contaminated, Levitically speaking. And they are for, purification rite. The purification rite was a rabbinical teaching about a particular way to cleanse oneself before eating. We're not really talking about the kind of hand washing that we've been doing because of COVID, especially, washing your hands with soap and water and scrubbing them for 30 seconds or singing happy birthday twice and all that kind of stuff. We're talking about a ceremonial rite in which you're using a very small amount and you're just like pouring it over hands just lightly, and that then you're ceremonially clean, ritually clean. So it's all about a ceremony. It's this Jewish ceremony, this Jewish rite that was supposed to take place. Notice the jars were empty. They probably shouldn't have been. They probably should have had water, at least in some of them. Now, we don't know how many people were there, but presumably 180 gallons of water would be way more than was needed for the ceremonial rite of purification. So the author is not talking about necessity. He's talking about abundance. He's talking about abundance by saying this. He's setting up an abundance, not just an abundance, but an overabundance of what was needed, So they had all these jars. They were empty. Jesus says, fill them up. Jesus fills them up, and everything turns to wine. The author doesn't give us a whole lot of details. When did it turn to wine? As it was being poured into the jars? After the first jar got filled? After they all got filled? Was it only the ladle full that turned to wine? No. Or is that when the miracle took place? The author isn't concerned about that. The first time we hear that it has actually turned from water to wine is when they took it to the steward. And when the steward tasted the water that had turned wine. Okay, so it has happened. The reader we assume that the miracle has taken place, that something has happened, but we don't know it until the author gives us just that little thing. So did they need 180 gallons of wine for this party? Probably not. Again, the point would be it's an overabundance, that is what the new life with Christ, what God offers, what Jesus has to offer is an overabundance. It is far more than is necessary for you or for anyone or for a party in first century Judea. It's an overabundance. Not only is it an overabundance, we find out from the steward that it's the best wine I've ever tasted. This is the good stuff. You gave us the bad stuff first. Most people use the good stuff, or and just until people get drunk, and then they bring out the bad. But you did it the opposite way. So we're told. So not only is the gift that Jesus offers overly abundant, it's overly good. Taste and see, the Lord is good. Taste and see, the Lord is good. Now, and again, we read this both in the physical, but also like the spiritual realm. And I find it almost ironic or humorous when you think of it this way. Who does the steward call over? The steward calls over the bridegroom. Like the bridegroom has any idea what's going on, right? Of course, as the reader, we know the bridegroom had nothing to do with anything taking place. But the steward is thinking, oh, the bridegroom, hey dude, you messed up a little bit. You ran out of you used your bad wine first. Now you're bringing out the good stuff. But we remember the imagery that John uses elsewhere. Pretty sure John uses elsewhere. It's used also in other scriptures, in other gospels, and is used extremely heavily in Revelation. That Jesus is the true bridegroom. So he called the wrong bridegroom. He called the bridegroom of that wedding over, who had no idea what had happened with the wine. When if he had called over the real bridegroom, that bridegroom did know what happened and was responsible for it. So I find that a little bit amusing, a little bit ironic that he kind of calls. You would say he called over the wrong bridegroom because he had no idea what was going on. So John 11, and this is an important important verse. Jesus did this, the first of his signs in Cana of Galilee, and revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. Okay, pause. We're going to pause there again. That's an important verse. Jesus had said, my hour is not yet come, and his hour is his hour of glorification. But we're seeing here some of his glory introduced through these signs, through this first sign. And his disciples believed in him. We're not told that anybody else did, but his disciples did. You're almost left wondering, though, what about the servants? Because John was clear that the servants knew what had happened. The servants knew, we just put water into those pots. That's all we did. And all of a sudden it's wine. And that guy over there is the one that told us to do it. But it doesn't say anything about them. But it does say that his disciples believed in him. So we're seeing some of these greater things that Jesus had promised to Nathanael. These greater things. So after this, he went down to Capernaum with his mother, his brothers, and his disciples, and they remained there a few days. I don't know about you, but when I read that up to and down to, I tend to think like north and south as being up and down. And that's not the case in Scripture. So it's pretty interesting to actually look at a map once in a while in your Bible to see geographically where these places are. So if you're thinking, well, he went down to Capernaum, then he went down south, or he went down the mountain, so to speak. I don't know that there's much elevation difference between Cana and Capernaum. There might be some, because Capernaum is right on the Sea of Galilee, right there on the Lake Tiberias shoreline, and Cana is away from it, so it might be in the hill country a little bit. But it's really to the east. Capernaum is to the east of Cana. All right, but John includes that to kind of set up and move into the next thing. That's a transitional phase. This part of the story is done. We'll move on to the next one. And yet nothing seems to happen in Capernaum. They're just there for a few days. So that's part of the transition too. They're there for a few days. Where do they go next? So picking up on verse 13. The Passover of the Jews was near, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Pause. So this is the first Passover in the Gospel of John. John mentions the Passover three different times. So reading John's Gospel would indicate that Jesus's ministry lasted in between 2 and 3 years, over 2, but not by much over 2, because Passovers are only a year apart, and he just started a week ago. So we say 3 years. Reading Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they only talk about the Passover once, so it's actually described as a 1-year ministry. But the Passover is mentioned 3 times in John. Passover is important to John. Passover is important to John. Passover, of course, was important to Jews, and still is. It is reliving. It's not just remembering, it's reliving the Exodus, God's deliverance of the Hebrews from Egyptian slavery. And there's a difference between remembering and reliving. Remembering is just remembering it happened, but reliving means putting yourself there. And so even in the liturgies for it, it's more than just remembering. The way the language is written in most of the liturgies, anyway, the ones I've read, would indicate, we were slaves. It's not we remember that our ancestors were. We were slaves. God saved us. So it's a stronger connection. And it's like one of the biggest feasts. Now, but there used to be 2 different feasts: the Feast of Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. That's scriptural. That's Old Testament stuff. By first century, they had kind of combined into one. I shouldn't say kind of. They combined into one. And it turned the Passover into basically a week-long feast, a big week-long celebration, rather than just a one-night deal. And it is probably the highest of high holy days. And it's the one where people are supposed to go to Jerusalem. No matter where you are, you're supposed to head to Jerusalem. And you're supposed to offer sacrifices. And you're supposed to pay your temple tax and stuff like that. If you're going a long distance and you're going to be making a sacrifice, take your animals with you. Take your animals with you because you don't want to risk them getting injured along the way, because they need to be without defect and all that. And every community, virtually every city, state, every locality had their own money, and you couldn't use that money to pay the temple tax because to have it, you couldn't even use a Roman coin because it had the Caesar's head. Caesar's head on it, and that's not appropriate. You had to use a special shekel in order to pay the tax. So yes, you had to have somebody change your money, and you had to buy your animals. John, we're going to talk a little bit first about, before we read the story, we're going to talk about the differences between John and the other Gospels with regards to this, because all four Gospels have a story about Jesus cleansing the temple. That's usually how we talk about it, cleansing the temple. But the synoptics put it in Jesus's final days, his last week, leading right up to his crucifixion. John, however, tells it right here at the very beginning of Jesus's ministry. So this leads some people to say, oh, he did it twice. Not very likely. Not very likely. I really can't see him getting away with doing it twice, or what would be the need, right? So John, they're probably telling the same story. It's just John changed it, moved it to the front, moved it right up front to the beginning for a point. Historically speaking, having it at the end of his ministry is probably more likely. He probably, again, getting away with it. I don't know that they would have allowed him to have gotten away with it so early in his ministry. Whereas by the end of his ministry, the religious leaders were scared of Jesus and scared of how much the people liked him. So getting away with it at the end of his ministry is more likely than getting away with it at the very beginning. Anyway, John also looks at it from a different point of view. When we read the synoptics, I'm going to say especially Luke, we can almost see it as a condemnation. We can see in the synoptics condemnation of the people who are doing the money changing and selling the animals, and we can say that it has to do with them being thieves, that they're charging too much and charging too high of an agio to change the monies and all that kind of stuff. We can see that. It's understandable why I've preached that myself, and you can see Jesus's anger in it, and that it's abusing the poor, especially, and it's abusing people, taking advantage of people who just want to worship God. John's is not that same case. John's is not that same case. We can see in his language, it's more than just, it's more than that. It's more than that. This is a condemnation of the whole setup, and that it's taking place inside his Father's house. So let's get to it. And I'll start again with verse 13. The Passover of the Jews was near, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple, he found people selling cattle, sheep, and doves, and the money changers seated at their tables. Making a whip of cords, he drove all of them out of the temple, both the sheep and the cattle. He also poured out the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. He told those who were selling the doves, "Take these things out of here. Stop making my Father's house a marketplace." His disciples remembered that it was written, "Zeal for your house will consume me." The Jews then said to him, "What sign can you show us for doing this?" Jesus answered them, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." The Jews then said, "This temple has been under construction for 46 years, and will you raise it up in 3 days?" But he was speaking of the temple of his body. After he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered that he had said this, and they believed the scripture and the word that Jesus had spoken. Excuse me one moment. Yeah. So we see in here that Jesus isn't, you can see the difference, I think. I hope that Jesus isn't upset with some of their wrong practices, the overcharging and stuff like that, which they probably were doing based on the other scriptures, but he's consumed by the whole idea itself, this whole idea. So we do see in this Jesus, this is showing conflict between because anytime there's the new system coming in, there's going to be conflict with an old system. And Jesus is ushering in this new system, and it's encountering the conflict with the old system. Let's back up a sec, backing up to the Cana of Galilee because of the wine, something I forgot to mention. The idea of wine, especially like this great abundance of wine, was also at the time an apocalyptic symbol, that the Messianic age would kind of usher in this abundance of joy and abundance of wine. So it's the new. Jesus was introducing the new. And here again, he's introducing a new system. And the new is conflicting with the old, with the existing. Jesus tells them that all that are doing it, take these things out of here. Stop making my Father's house a marketplace. Translating it as marketplace, we're almost missing it because it's also in their house of trade. So John is kind of playing with that word house, my Father's house, and a house of trade. So that there's a stronger connection there of house than marketplace. Okay, and zeal for your house will consume me. Now, the religious leaders, the Jews, again, but they're just the religious leaders. They're not all Jews at this point. What sign can you show us for doing this? So John uses that word sign, and we might be tempted, because we've already seen what he means by sign. That's not what they're asking for. They're not asking for a miracle. Perhaps John is actually using that word intentionally because they're so far off the mark. They're actually asking him to show his credentials. They're actually it would be a warrant. Show us your ID, show us your warrant that gives you the authority to do these things. They're all caught up in that whole idea of authority and approval. So what sign can you show us for doing this? Jesus redirects the conversation and talks about the temple and says, destroy this temple and I will rebuild it in 3 days. But he's not talking about the temple. The readers know that we're on the inside. We're on the inside. John is giving us details that the people in the story don't have. Even though that information is based on something that has not yet happened. So he says, destroy this temple and I will rebuild it in 3 days. They're thinking he's talking about this physical structure there. Whereas Jesus is speaking, John tells us, he's talking about his body. He's talking about himself and talking about his death and resurrection. John does that for a couple different reasons. like kind of the obvious is that foretelling, a little bit of foretelling of what's going to happen. But the idea is that, again, comes back to that, well, temple. The temple is the place, the locus of God's presence. It's where God is at. That's what Jewish tradition would have said, especially at the time. God is here. This is God's house. This is God's house. This is where God is located on earth, trying to contain God, but that was the thought. And you read that throughout the Old Testament, especially in the book of Exodus, God's presence in the tabernacle. Okay. And then when you get into Second Samuel, First Kings, you see it again, God's presence in the temple. That was the locus for God's presence. But Jesus is now saying that he is God's temple, that God is present here with me, in me. I am God's presence on earth, not this building. Not this building. So that's a very theological statement at that point. It's not just this physical, this physical thing talking about this building. This is a very spiritual, theological statement in that little thing. So we're going to finish up chapter 2 with those last couple of verses, those last 3 verses, which I might read again tomorrow because they tie us into chapter 3. There's a connection. They're a transition point. John uses transition points. When he was in Jerusalem during the Passover festival, many people believed in his name because they saw the signs that he was doing. But Jesus, on his part, would not entrust himself to them because he knew all people and needed no one to testify about anyone, for he himself knew what was in everyone. Pause. End of chapter 2. So again, we see there Jesus's omniscience, Jesus's knowledge. Jesus knows what's in the heart, not just what's in the mouth. Notice, though, it says that many people believed in him because of the signs that they saw. So presumably he did other things while he was there, but it does not say anything about him revealing his glory. It doesn't speak about their depth of faith or that they truly came to believe, just that they believed because of what he had done. Okay, so that's it for today. Today, friends, 9:43. Woo! I hope that this has been beneficial to you, that you've learned something, relearned something. If you have any questions or anything, let me know what those might be. We'll try to answer them as you go about your days, not just today, but every day. Keep those eyes and ears, physical and spiritual, wide open, and to what God, our living, active, loving God, is doing in your life and the lives of those around you. When you see it, when you hear it, thank God, and then testify. Just tell somebody what you're doing. Tell somebody about it. Until we meet again, my friends, be blessed. Be blessed. Bye.